Education, presentation by Dr. Randy Watson, State Education Commissioner. Tonight, Dr. Randy Watson will make a presentation on the Kansas State Board of Education's Kansas Can Vision for Kansas to lead the world in the success of each student. The State Board's mission is to prepare Kansas students for lifelong success through rigorous, quality academic instruction, career training, and character development according to each student's gifts and talents. Kansans Can gives directions for a more student-focused system and resources for individual success. This item is provided for the board's information and discussion.
I'd like to welcome Dr. Watson to the table. I've known him for a long time. I won't get any deeper than that. I've seen the presentation, and it's something that is very interesting and exciting. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, President Rohde and Dr. Thompson, all board members. Thank you for having me this evening. And on behalf of the State Board of Education, we want to say congratulations to all the students and the programs and the business partnerships that you're doing. I don't know, every era has with it its challenges, and every day has with it its challenges. And I'd just like for all of you tonight, with all the things that are going on that the local school boards have to deal with, I'd like for us to think about this organization structure that we call school and how we can work together to best meet the needs of every student that attends a Wichita Public School, wherever they may be, and think just about the organizational structure. So we developed what we still call a new vision, and I'll go over a little bit about that in a second, but I want to tell you that tonight we're going to talk about the why that we're going to have to change, a little bit about the what and the how, but a lot about the why. So we like to say Kansas is going to lead the world. I'm going to show you some of the metrics that we'll use to actually identify that. But the key to this is, yes, we're going to go after Singapore and Finland. That's always good. And the success of each student. So if you think about this, just the young people that were here tonight, every one of those young people have different passions and aspirations of what they want to do. And how do we do that with teachers that may have 25 students in an elementary classroom, or a caseload of 160, or maybe a special education caseload, of 40 kids? How do we do that? And honor the work that they're doing every day and the principals in those buildings. So that's what I want to talk to you about this evening. This is a schoolhouse in Kansas. And if you would go back 100 years ago, you would clearly see that this is what education looked like in Kansas 100 years ago. And we didn't think much about this from the time we organized as a territory until consolidation in 1965. There were tens of thousands of these schools all across Kansas, including here in Sedgwick County. And I'll often ask this, how many grades were in the one-room schoolhouse? 8, yeah. Sometimes people say all, and the answer is no. High school was not, because most Kansans didn't have a need to go to high school. I like to point out, if you notice the teacher, which is right in the middle of the back row, and the young man that's standing next to her, I'm going to guess as an 8th grader, and he purposely said, we take the team photo today, you're standing next to me because you're a little mischievous, if you can just kind of see that in his eyes. But I'm reminded of my great-grandmother when I was visiting her as a child, 8 or 9 years old. And it's one of those moments where I remember when my mother said, we're going to go to Grammy's house today. We'll see your grandparents and your great-grandmother. And I'm like, I don't want to go to Grammy's house. It's this little house, and it's old, and it smells like mothballs, and I just don't want to go to Grammy's house. And Mother gave me the lecture like all of our moms did. No, you need to respect your elders. There's going to be a time she's not going to be with us, and you're going to really think about this time. And that was so true. And I wish I had videoed it. I wish I had at least had better memory of it because I was a young boy. But she was telling stories about her childhood and about her kids growing up, which was my grandmother. And she said, and I think this is so unique to Kansas because it resonates anywhere in Kansas, Randy, I remember the day we moved the kids to town. Doesn't that just sound like Kansas? She had gone to a one-room schoolhouse, and she remembered the fight of going to school at that time and going into that school system. And we organized school much differently when we brought the kids to town. In fact, my elementary school had it blazoned across the school in Coffeyville. It was called Garfield Grade School. And for the first time in Kansas history, we created grades. And we created systems of organizing kids around grade and age and time. And now we don't think anything about that because we've been cranking it out for 100 years. But I can just imagine the school board meetings. Can you imagine filled with community members saying, "You're going to do what to our kids?" We get to know this teacher very well. But this gentleman really changed it all. I ask this question usually when I'm with staff and say, "Who is this man that changed education forever?" And many of the guesses that you would say, "Oh, it's John Dewey," or it's some of the great educators. And it's not. It's Henry Ford. And you say, "Well, Henry Ford," I could have given you a hint, given you this one. But I remember my grandmother, my great-grandmother, again telling the story of the first date of my grandmother and my grandfather. Now, my grandmother, her daughter, was named Bertha, and my grandfather was named Orville. Are there any better period pieces in Kansas than Bertha and Orville? And she's telling the story, and then my grandmother picked it up. And have you ever been in a family reunion or a family gathering when you realize this is the first time that my great-grandmother had heard the rest of the story? Orville, my grandfather, comes to pick my grandmother up for their first date. He's going to go to a silent movie in Coffeyville and picked him up on the farm. And my great-grandmother said, "Orville, I think you ought to take the horse and buggy. I'm not sure about this new car thing. I don't like this at all." And they had a great discussion, but my grandfather persuaded her, "No, it'll be great. I'll have her back at 9:30. It'll be fun." And then my grandmother picked up the story, and I realized that my great-grandmother had never heard that the car did indeed break down all the way to the movie theater. Her greatest fear. And all I could think about at that time was, my grandmother said, and I said to Orville, no, I'm not that kind of girl, Orville, because, there are all these things that Henry Ford didn't create, but that the car did. Roads, drive-in theaters, the back seat. Teenagers were great, knew about this. And there was something disturbing even at 8 or 9 thinking about my grandparents, Bertha and Orville, even thinking about a backseat experience that I think maybe harmed me for life. But Henry Ford put together a new way of dealing in business called the assembly line. Brought people off the farm, which was the major occupation in Kansas and everywhere, and said, "We're going to teach you to put a tire on. You're going to do it for an 8-hour shift with a couple of 15-minute breaks. It's not going to be very exciting, but we're going to pay you really well, double the going rate." And he created the middle class. He created to where you could have a nice home, with a garage. He created that you could own a Model T. And this industry wasn't just about automobiles. Certainly we could see it in the aerospace industry here. It was basically a low-skilled, repetitive job. You needed basic skills to do, and you could earn a great living and with a great pension and do it your entire life. The problem with the assembly line, as you think of business today, most of our businesses have rapidly left the Henry Ford model or are leaving it as we go forward. This was how school looked in 1940. Set in rows, bells would ring. You would go from one subject to the other, and you were age and academic and together. By the way, this teacher had it all going on, didn't she? 3 walls of slate. Whoa, you can't get any better than that. And so this was taken, in the 1940s. But I took this in April of 2017 in a school. And what do you notice that's different about this than the school in the 1940s? There are some differences. You see students of color, which you didn't see in schools. Kansas is the home of Brown versus Board of Topeka in 1954. And so you see students of color. You see a student that's disabled in a wheelchair. You would not have seen that in the 1940s. And you see technology, whiteboards and a document camera and an LCD projector and all this great technology that has come to bear versus just the slate board and you had to bang the erasers together right after you were a young kid. But you still see bells. You still see that students are in rows. We still start school around 8 o'clock in the morning so that kids can get up with enough sunlight to do their chores before they come to school. And we end school between 3 and 4 so they can go home and have enough daylight to still do their chores. And we let school out around Memorial Day. We take up in mid-August so they can do harvest in the middle of the summer. So we talk about that, and not much has changed from the organization of schools. But what has changed are the kids that we serve and the families that we serve over that time. You may recognize this. This is an Amazon distribution center in Gardner, Edgington, Kansas. It's only about 18 months old. And you may look at that and notice, oh, there aren't very many people. If you look at the very bottom, it's almost like Where's Waldo? You can see a couple of people there, but it's very automated. And in fact, here's the Kansas City distribution center, which again, just opened just down the road. It's two of the largest distribution centers that Amazon now own are in Kansas, serving all of the United States. So I don't know, how many of you have ever ordered anything off Amazon? Yeah. So I don't think, did you do this? Did you pick up the phone, call Amazon, hey, I'd like to place an order today? You just got on your phone and you got on your computer. You went, that computer somewhere went to Amazon. That computer, those little orange things on the bottom of those shelves are computers. It wired the computer and said, Dr. Thompson just ordered a bag of dog food and a new scarf and a couple of books, and it had to go throughout this huge warehouse with several of those and find those, bring it together, come down, shoot it down the chute. There you can see on the conveyor belt it's going to the truck. And then miraculously in 2 days, anywhere in the United States, it shows up on your doorstep. And the first time that a human may touch that is when the UPS or the FedEx driver takes it off the truck and puts it on your doorstep. Now, why is that instructive? Because that's much different than Henry Ford's America. That's Jeff Bezos' America. And in our lifetime, we remember the retail giant, don't we, of America. It's called Walmart. Walmart, though, if you look at this model, is much different than Walmart. Walmart, you still go to the store, and you walk in, you're greeted by a greeter, and you get a card, and you shop. And yet, Amazon Prime Day, which happened in late July, was the largest retail marketing day in the history of America. So we're rapidly shifting what it looked like. Remember when Walmart came into every community, what happened to downtown? What happens as we shift to Amazon as the retail giant? What happens to Walmart? And what happens to downtown? And as new jobs are created, where do jobs occur? Because Amazon would love to deliver packages by drone. They already have perfected the technology. They're waiting for FFA clearance. And I'm betting that if Kansas gives that as a state, in Lenexa, Kansas, you may be delivering by drone here in Kansas fairly quickly drone technology. Now, if that occurs and you could reduce Amazon's overhead and shipping by 50%, which is one of their great expenses, who does that put out of work? Who drives UPS trucks and FedEx trucks? What level of education are most of those people? High school graduates. Good jobs? You bet. Hard work? Absolutely. With a little overtime between now and then, they'll make a really good living. And what happens if 50% of those jobs get automated out? Where will those high school jobs go? It's one of the changes as technology disrupts our economy throughout. How many of you have ever taken an Uber? You are the problem. You are the problem. Because some of the teachers that we were honoring, go ask any good elementary teacher that all of you had, and they told you, do not get in the car with strangers. And you did not listen. You got off of the plane probably. You put in your phone. I already paid for the experience. Here comes Josh in a black Nissan. It's going to be great. We're going to have a conversation. In my generation, we'd worry that they would slash your throat. They'd roll you down a hill, never to be seen again. And now we're having a conversation about, well, what do you do when you're not driving for Uber? And Uber is displacing first-generation Americans that drive taxi cabs and have benefits and do not drive their own car, replaced by part-time workers who drive their own car and work whenever they want. See the model? And we're all contributing to that model as we go forward. Uber's trying to automate. Prediction is by 2025, 30% of automobiles in the urban areas will be automated. They won't have drivers. In fact, when we get tonight and you're on your way home and you put the car in reverse, many of you will see a rear-facing camera. Those are all type of things that have been developed by the automobile that may drive itself. And I know some of you that raised your hand said, I'm not getting in a car with any person. And all I know is you got in one without a stranger. So I'm thinking it may happen. And then who will that put out of work? Well, the Uber driver, or at least 30% of those may go. How many of you own an Apple iPhone? How many own an Android device? All right. Does anyone here on the board not own a smartphone? I always like to say when people that raise their hand, when I do that in a large audience, thank you for leaving your bag phone out in the hall. But the truth is this device and the Android are only 10 years old. In the summer of 2007, and we've all converted. I point that out because in 10 years, we've all converted to that technology. So if we have an innovative second grade teacher says, I'm really innovative, I'm going to teach coding on the Apple iPhone, I can almost guarantee you when they graduate high school, the iPhone won't be around. And how do I know that? How many of you are carrying a BlackBerry? That was the technology in 2007, and the turnaround time is shortening. Now, all that's just interesting and it's factual, but it has to do with the changing workforce that our kids are going to go into. And so when you look at a report that was given to President Obama just before he left office, that 83% chance of workers earning less than $20 an hour are going to see their jobs automated. That's pretty frightening because where are kids with simply a high school education, or even worse, kids that drop out of high school going to work and have an opportunity to move into the middle class? Now, there'll be jobs, but they're moving to skilled jobs where we used to have unskilled. In fact, here's a latest research report from the Brookings Institute that says 65% of the jobs of the children that are in elementary school have yet to be invented. Now, if you think about that, and I'm a history teacher, President Rode, as you know, so I love to teach the factual content of history. I can teach Sherman's March to the Sea longer than Sherman marched to the sea. I love the Ordinance of 1785. And all that is easily Googleable today. And yet, we have kids that don't understand why the Civil War was fought. I oftentimes, when I look at some of the turmoil in America, I thought in my generation we'd put that to rest. I mean, obviously we haven't, as we wrestle with some of those things. Think about the education that we have to do today and in the future is less about translating knowledge, because knowledge is changing, work is changing, and it's more about the entrepreneurial creativity and how to learn. That's a different skill set. So I love this quote. It reminds me of my great-grandmother and the gas lights that she had. But we really have to think about the structure a little different. So here's what we learned when we went out and asked Kansans what they wanted in their schools. We said to Kansans, if you think of a successful 24-year-old, can you describe that person in vivid detail? We asked the second question, what's K-12's role in developing the person you just described? And the third question, what's higher ed's role in developing that person that you just described? 70% of the responses that we received from Kansans said that what make up success are not measured on a standardized test. That their other skill set, their perseverance, their goal setting, their character, they're having a set of, we call them lots of things. I heard you talk about, Cheryl, I heard you talk about those soft skills or 21st century skills or employability skills. We have different names for them, but we're talking about these set of skills that many of us learned either working as a young person or through our family or a combination thereof. We also went out and asked business leaders from Spirit and Hallmark and Cerner and Black & Veatch to mom and pop shop, tell us what make up a successful young person. And the business industry said 81% what make up those are those skill sets that aren't measured on a standardized test. This was instructive as the state board went to put together their work because Kansas said very clearly, what we have is we're out of balance. We're teaching kids how to study for a test at the same time that we know in 10 years when they graduate what has changed is the entire world. That the static knowledge that we're teaching them when we come back from Christmas and we go into test prep mode so we don't look bad when the scores are produced in the newspaper have little relevance to the job and market and the careers that they're going to have. Because for most of them, they're going to change 3, 4, 5 times what they do. Unlike my father that worked for the Missouri Pacific Railroad his entire life. The job that he had, by the way, you can't get today in 2017. It's been eliminated by when the caboose left the train and was replaced by the engineer. Here's some of the takeaways Kansas said they wanted in their schools. They wanted an emphasis on all-day kindergarten, which the legislature in Kansas funded for the first time in the history of its state. We ought to be grateful for that. And they said every community ought to have deep discussions about what do we do with birth to 5 so that every kid has the opportunity to come to school social, emotionally, and academically ready to learn. It didn't say we have to necessarily scale up schools. It said every community, either through parents or other organizations, should make sure that happens. Kansas said changes need to be made in school culture. You just recognized tonight some of the best and brightest here in Wichita. Kansas said we should never, ever stop doing that. And we should have the same fervor that we do with the accolades and stand up and applaud those kids and their parents and their grandparents. But what about the kid that has a full ride scholarship to go to Wichita Area Technical School to be a diesel mechanic? Where's the intensity and the accolades for that kid? Because we need plumbers and we need electricians, and we have said for too long that you're a second-class citizen if you go in one of those trades versus going to a 4-year college. Kansas said we ought to stop that, and we could stop that today. Kansas also said that we wanted social workers and school counselors and school psychologists working with kids. That one of our greatest needs were social and emotional needs. We're seeing greater and greater needs. Your teaching staff will tell you that. And as much as we want to deal with it, many of our teachers, myself would have been included, are just not, we weren't trained to handle the severity of some of the things that we're seeing. And yet, during No Child Left Behind, we cut a lot of those positions so we could have more reading and math, right? And so Kansas said, hire some. Take some of your at-risk money and hire them, lower that ratio. Don't have them running master schedules. Don't have them be pseudo-assistant principals. Have them working with kids and families to help in the environment. Collaboration between schools and businesses. You honored one of those tonight, a deep collaboration. Community service needs to play a bigger role. And then finally, schools need to be reorganized around the student, not around the system. We have a deep system in education that's going to need to be questioned as we go forward. The state board said there are 5 skill sets that need to be present for every successful high school graduate. Most of our schools today are stuck measuring academic in many different ways, a little bit of cognitive, but many different ways, and we're not measuring civic engagement very well or employability or technical. You know, in the last primary election in August, less than 10% of Kansans turned out to vote. So I'm a social studies teacher, so you get a little bit of that. But how can we run a democracy when people don't participate? We're going to have an election in November. It's very critical, isn't it? For this school board, for county commissions, for city commission, much less at the state level or federal level. Most decisions that happen that affect the kids in Wichita are happening right here. A little bit are happening at our level, and very few are happening at the federal level. They're happening here. And we need to encourage people. Let's run for school board. Let's run for county commission. Let's organize a blood drive. Technical employability skills, as I mentioned. And the State Board of Ed said we have to have some outcomes. So let's look at these. As I go through these and then answer any questions that you might have, I want to point out that what you don't see on these 5 outcomes the state board's measuring is a test score. Now, I will tell you, we had our annual report last week. All the media was there. And you know what they were there to listen to? Where are your test scores? I'll talk about from a policy standpoint, whether it's this board or the State Board of Education or in the legislature or at the federal level. If we want to start talking about what third graders ought to be doing at a policy level, we will drive unintended consequences. Go ask your third grade teacher how much pressure they felt to teach to a test, and then ask them if kids that were proficient in reading on the state exam were really reading at grade level, and they'll tell you no. And you say, how could that be? Because we test prepped them. We brought all hands on deck, told the special ed teacher, you better get those up. Told the PE teachers, you're lucky to have a job. Would you come help us in reading and math? As if that they didn't have that value. So at the state level and at your level, you ought to look at those test scores, and you ought to hold the buildings accountable to those with teachers and parents to look at the progress that they're making. But we're trying to measure big outcomes, such as do kids show up to kindergarten ready to learn? And a couple of these I want to talk about, which is taking a look at high school graduation and post-secondary completion. Every student ought to graduate high school, and the vast majority ought to go on to earn something beyond high school. Now, there's lots of reasons why they don't today, right? It could be reading skills. It could be, just like you said, they don't know how to present themselves. They don't know what it's like to build a resume. They don't know what it is to show up to work on time and give a good effort. There are many reasons. President Rhodey and I have had these conversations about business a lot. Talk to why aren't they being successful? And so when you look at this, we know this. In our state, 71% of the job market requires you to produce some kind of piece of paper to interview for the job. And as I mentioned about my father, that has completely shifted in one generation. 30 years ago, my grandmother retired from the Coffeyville Memorial Hospital. She did not go to college. In fact, she didn't go to high school. She was the head of the dietary department at Coffeyville Memorial Hospital. Today, that requires a master's degree to fulfill her job that she held her entire life. Is it better or worse? I don't know, but it's a different skill set. You want good jobs? They're there. Industry's begging for them right here in Wichita, but they're skilled work. They're not unskilled work like we had for so many years, where you could just kind of learn an apprenticeship. Most of the work is skilled work. And you can see all of that does not have to be a baccalaureate degree. So if I want to be a diesel mechanic, and I show up, and I'm told to graduate from any high school in this city and in any high school in our state, you must take 4 years of English, 3 years of math, 3 years of science, 3 years of social studies, a fine arts credit, a PE credit, maybe a financial literacy, and you'll all study the same thing. That's requirements to go to 4 years of college, to a Board of Regents requirement. We made it the graduation requirement all across the state. So by its very nature, if I'm stuck sitting next to someone that wants to be in pre-law, I want to be a diesel mechanic, and I'm told, well, you just need to learn to like the scarlet letter. And I see no relevance in that because it doesn't have anything to do with my future plans. I need to be reading the GM manual, and I need to understand that really good. And you say, well, we'll get to that in about 4 years. And then we wonder what the disconnect is for so many of our kids. And we wonder why so many of our kids do go off to college and then come home feeling like failures when we need skilled work at all levels, including baccalaureate, master's, and PhD. I want to share with you where Wichita is tonight because I'm really excited about the progress that you've made. So I'm here to celebrate that with you tonight. And I also am here to issue the challenges that not only you have, but down in Derby, where they're having their school board meeting tonight, and all across the state. But before I do that, I want to talk to you about risk factors. Have you ever noticed when football teams line up on a Friday night in Kansas that we would not probably have Douglas School lining up against Wichita East to play football? Right? We would even chuckle about that because we wouldn't think about that because size matters, right? That's why we have classifications of 1A to 5A. We have a 1A state championship that probably doesn't want to go play the mediocre 6A high school football team. But when we look at test scores or we look at graduation rates or we look at how many students go on to post-secondary success, have you ever noticed we'll put Wichita scores right next to Andover and we call it equal? It's not. Those school districts border each other, right? Wichita Heights and the Andover School District, I think you could spit on the line, either side. And yet the demographics that they serve are extremely different. So we know this. These four things make a difference. Cumulative poverty makes the biggest difference. How long are students on free lunch? And if it's generations, it's harder to break than if they've been on it for 3 months. Does that make sense? Chronic absenteeism. How many students miss more than 10% of the days of school? Mobility. I asked some of your principals today, how many, do you have kids that move more than 5 times during the year? And several of them raised their hand. Every time they move, even from elementary to middle school, it's an opportunity to lose students because you're leaving one environment and the other. Same thing happens when they go to college, right? They leave high school, they go on to post-secondary, and then you hold your breath. Are they going to make that transition? Because it's different. And then the only one we really can control is suspension and expulsion. And guess what school district of 286 has the highest risk factors in the state of Kansas? You're sitting in it. Not only the largest, but the one that has the greatest challenges that we have. And you know what? You have attacked that over the years. You've honored the diversity that brings, and you said, we know that, but it's not going to be an excuse. And I want to show you the results that you should be remarkably proud of tonight. And that's this chart. We call it our post-secondary effective rate chart. You can get this for every school district in Kansas. It's public. It's part of our accountability system. And you'll notice we're looking there at a 5-year average. Because if we went not too far to the north, Sedgwick would say, ooh, if you only look at 1 year, Randy, these small class sizes can really vary. So we wanted to look at 5-year average, even though in Wichita the average won't look so different. The yellow bar represents high school graduation. This is across all district, the whole school district. The red represents those number of kids who after high school go on somewhere to further their post-secondary education. That could be a technical school, could be a community college, could be Harvard. And the blue-purple represent simply the red times the yellow. We call that the effective rate. Those kids that started as freshmen in high school, that graduated high school and went on somewhere post-secondary. Now, we took this and we factored for every 286 school districts, we said, we have a predictive value that where we think your school district should score. For Wichita, that number was 24 to 30% of your kids, based upon the severe risk factors that you have, we said would go on past high school to be successful. And guess where you're at? 30%. The very top range of that. There should be a shower of accolades on this school board, this administrative staff, and this teaching staff, and really the whole community of Wichita. You have done hard work. Now you look at that, we need 70 to 75. Remember that number 71? So do we have work to do? You bet we have work to do. Guess what? So does every school district in this state. So you're not alone in that. Because our focus has been on looking at our math scores, while this number didn't move very much. So when we look at how your students did, well, 41% of them after high school go on somewhere post-secondary. We'd like to raise that to about 80. Now, remember, they don't all have to go to KU. I say I have 3 degrees from Kansas State, so that's why I wanted to say that. No, they don't have to go to 4 years. We need about half of those students to go to associate degree or the technical schools and get a diploma, or excuse me, a credential. You know, LPN, that's a great profession. And your graduation rate sitting at 7.3%. You've made great strides over the last several years in raising that. We need to continue to increase it toward 95. But we need to increase that along with the post-secondary success. And the reason that more numbers aren't going on is a complex answer. Right? Some of the kids that you see were here today academically are off the chart great, right? And yet they're going to have issues in that transition to post-secondary. It won't be academic. I remember several years ago when I was superintendent, the class valedictorian in McPherson was a national merit finalist, an AP scholar with distinction, 4.0, never knew a B. And yet she wanted to go to KU and be a clinical psychologist. Wasn't worried about academics. You know what I was worried about? She didn't drive. She had never been outside of McPherson, and we took her to KU and put her in a dorm room, and she freaked out. What, you're going to stick me with someone I've never roomed with in my life? I've never been away from home? We thought this is going to be a disaster. She graduated last spring, 4 years. Highest honors at KU. We never knew that the academics weren't going to be, but we had to make sure she could adjust to the social environment. See what we had to do with her plan? That was much different than some kids that are going to need academic attention. It really is individualizing this thing going forward. So we said we got to have some schools try out a new model. The old model is built upon 2 factors: that people are going to go back and work on an assembly line, and they're going to go home, and Ward and June Cleaver are going to welcome them. June will have dinner on the table, and Ward's going to go, how was school today, Beeve? Well, Eddie Haskell, tormented me a little bit, and it was a pretty simple life. Most of the kids we serve today aren't going to go working on assembly line, and most of them are not going home to Ward and June Cleaver. But that's how our system was set up. By the way, teachers have too large of caseloads. They're working as hard as they can. You're working as hard as you can. We've got to look at this. So we asked some school districts if they would volunteer. Said, would you agree to be launched into space on a rocket we have yet to build? And we named them after the original 7 Mercury astronauts, and you're seeing them. And I can just tell you, we're about 6 weeks into this journey. They're all going to redesign 1 elementary and 1 secondary school by next fall. They had no idea what they were going to sign up for. 80% of their staff said, yes, we'll do it. Their teacher union said, yes, we'll support it. And their school board voted in favor. And about 3 weeks ago, someone were going, are you kidding me? We signed up for what? This is hard work. And teachers and principals and community members are designing it in consultation with each other, because we can't leave any of them out. And they meet every 7 days with our team in designing it. And we're in the early stages of that. We didn't know if we'd have 7 actually even want to do it. We were keeping our fingers crossed that we'd have 7, because this was over the summer. We didn't have much time to turn this around, and we had 29. So we took 21 others, and we created what we call Gemini districts, and you see those here. We can't be physically in those districts, but we meet with them virtually every 2 weeks to share what we're doing. And they have agreed to totally redesign 1 elementary and 1 secondary school and launch either in the fall of 18 or the fall of 19. That's where we're headed. All 286 school districts in the next 10 years. A redesigned format to meet the needs of every kid. So if you ask, what will it look like? And I'm going to give you the generalities. That every kid will have a personalized plan. Now you say that in today's design, every teacher just fell on the floor. Like, how do I make that happen? I love the kids and I want to make that happen. When I taught high school, I had a caseload of 160 kids. So I'm 52 minutes a day. How do I personalize that experience? It's going to be project-based. We're going to be working a lot in real-world work as we personalize that. Longer time with teachers. That may be multiple grades, it may be multiple hours, it may be both. And an immersion with parents in the community on what they want their schools to look like, just like it always has been. So that's where we're headed. Again, I want to thank you. You have always led the way in Wichita, not to just be the largest school district, but to be a school district that cares deeply about kids. And I say this about teachers, and it's certainly true of all of you. It pays really well to be on the Wichita School Board, doesn't it? I'm hoping Dr. Thompson at least brings you some peanuts and a bottle of water I see there. That's what we work for. And every month you show up because you care about other people's kids. What a great tribute that is to this community and to the work that you're doing. So I'd like to leave you with this and then answer any questions that you have. We'll see if we get some audio with that. Maybe not.
We meet in an hour of change and challenge, in a decade of hope and fear, in an age of both knowledge and ignorance. The greater our knowledge increases, the greater our ignorance unfolds. No man can fully grasp how far and how fast we have come. But condense, if you will, the 50,000 years of man's recorded history in a time span of but a half a century. Stated in these terms, we know very little about the first 40 years, except at the end of them, advanced man had learned to use the skins of animals to cover them. Then about 10 years ago, under this standard, man emerged from his caves to construct other kinds of shelter. Only 5 years ago, man learned to write and use a cart with wheels. Christianity began less than 2 years ago. The printing press came this year. And then less than 2 months ago, during this whole 50-year span of human history, the steam engine provided a new source of power. Newton explored the meaning of gravity. Last month, electric lights and telephones and automobiles and airplanes became available. Only last week did we develop penicillin and television and nuclear power. This is a breathtaking pace, and such a pace cannot help but create new ills as it dispels old. So it is not surprising that some would have us stay where we are a little longer, to rest, to wait. If this capsule history of our progress teaches us anything, it is that man in his quest for knowledge and progress is determined and cannot be deterred. We shall send to the moon, 240,000 miles away, a giant rocket more than 300 feet tall on an untried mission to an unknown celestial body, and then return it safely to Earth. But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone. And therefore, as we set sail, we ask God's blessing on the most hazardous and dangerous and greatest adventure on which man has ever embarked.
President Rhodey, Kathy Bush on state board's here with us tonight, and I know many of you know Kathy well. On behalf of all members of the state board and myself, I want to again say thank you for your service, and if you have any questions or any time, or you just want to move on because you don't want to be here till 10 o'clock, I understand that too, having sat in all of your seats.
We'll start the questions off with Lynn.
Thank you. Thank you for coming, Randy. This is probably one of your shortest presentations, so I've heard you in Topeka.
I know, yeah, I can get cranked up.
But you know what's exciting about it, and I think that's what's interesting, and we've had the goal in our plan for a long time of having 100% high school graduation, and we get criticized for that because it's not practical. But we've not changed that because we don't want to lose a single child. And I really appreciate factoring in the risk factors because, again, we've talked about that. All of these things that you've really said, everything from that we want kids to go to a 2-year school, they don't have to go to a 4-year school. We've said that sometimes parents are our biggest obstacle for technical college because they think their kids are a failure if they go there instead of a 4-year college. But technical is going to be the best education those kids can get. And I think the other thing I really like, besides having those risk factors put into play, because again, they make a big difference on a day-to-day. I mean, I found out about mobility when my kids first started going to school, and sometimes our percentage is way over 100% in a building, and that does make a difference. Sometimes the kids, they start there and they end there, but they've gone to 3 schools in between. And I also really like the fact that these redesigns are being done by the school, the district, and all. But I'm guessing it's taking a lot of resources for them. So, and I know you said that you guys only be involved in 7. What are you finding for the type of involvement that they're having, and will you be able to provide the rest of the district's information on how we can do it then later?
Yes, and I want to say this. Any school and any school district can do what the Mercury and Gemini are doing. We didn't give them one additional dollar. We didn't replace any teacher. We didn't build a new building. We didn't change the school board or any administrator. Because when you look at if you look at schools that maybe are different in other states, you start with the charter, or you build like Olathe West, which is a brand new high school, but you open it and you choose the staff and everyone to go in it. So we wanted to be purposeful about that. So what we're doing, we're on a 7-day rotation where 2 of our people are embedded in those schools every 7 days on a rotation. Every 2 weeks, we take the Gemini schools and we have a video conference and we're explaining what they need to do in between times without us there. And then we're sharing that out with everyone so that they can learn that experience. We think as we scale up Gemini Phase 2 and we take on more, that we will need service centers and other people in the model to give assistance. We're also going to learn how much does it help to have somebody embedded every 2 weeks in these schools, because what we're able to do is bring those teachers and those parents together in that design, and we're doing it because we're doing it so fast and we're designing everything. So we're learning a great deal, and really, if you invite me back in the spring, I can tell you a lot more about that.
Okay.
I may also want to say, as we think about risk factors, and oftentimes people will, you always take the frame of reference and hear what you want to hear. I want to be clear. I taught in Andover in a wonderful school district, but their challenges are different than your challenges. Mm-hmm. And we tend to treat every school district as they're the same. They're not, and every community is different in Kansas, and so you have to look at the culture of your community. That does not mean it's any easier in Andover or Hayesville or Derby. They're just different needs. And how the community is going to go about addressing those needs are just different. So I hope I answered that for you, Lynn.
Good. And I've got a couple others if there's no other questions. I know as in my role as senator, I've talked with some of the different state groups, 4-H, Girl Scouts, those kind of things. And I know you've invited many of those to the table, and they're excited that they can participate. How do you see that working? And how do we make sure that we have quality connections to the schools so that kids aren't, we're not designing an individual plan that they can just sit at home and do nothing?
Thank you for mentioning that, because in the longer version I talk about that some. Learning doesn't stop when kids leave school. It happens forever. So think about this from a scouting perspective. Have you ever known an Eagle Scout? Did that person, that young man, even though they're allowing females in now, but that young man, did they have to do anything to become an Eagle Scout? How much credit do we give for that in any Kansas high school today? How about a kid that maybe this summer went on a church mission trip, went to Guatemala and built shelters for people? Connecting those dots to other community organizations that have a long history of servicing kids and have a system will allow us to maximize our resources. When we have finite resources, we're hoping to have more, but they have resources too. And if we combine those, we can start to blend what learning looks like so we can extend that for all kids. Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, 4-H, church, youth groups, they're all going to play a huge role, and there are others. But those are ones that have been around for decades and centuries, and they have a long track record of great success. So we're proud to be partnering across the state with those organizations, and they're at the table as we're redesigning this. Mm-hmm. I was smiling because one of the tenets of the redesign is that physical activity and learning go hand in hand. Mm-hmm. That we can't keep a kid in from recess because they don't know their math facts. It sounds like that's what you ought to do. It's counterintuitive to what they need long term. So all of those are great things.
Well, and thank you. And I think that's one of the things we'll see is that many of the things that are happening in other districts, we have been doing them. In some cases, we don't get a lot of credit or we don't pat ourselves on the back for it. But I think as people get into the system, our system as a district, they'll see a lot of those exciting things, and I hope we can do more. So
yes,
thank you.
Cheryl?
Yeah, just a couple of things. Obviously, our three major goals this year here in the district are academic rigor, social and emotional, and community engagement, all of which fit right into what the state's wanting us to do. As we move into a strategic plan redevelopment, which Dr. Thompson's moving out in the board to do community listening sessions in the next couple of months. And as we start developing that community plan, how can we link with the information that you're gaining from the new schools to be able to look at our strategic plan, build in these 5 key areas that you've listed to make sure that we're matching to the state with our strategic plan?
Cheryl, thank you for that question. I think it's important to do that. I'm going to go out on a limb because I haven't been to your community. You're going to go out in the community and you're going to ask them some more questions. I did that when I was superintendent also, and then we did it across the state. I'm going to go out on a limb. I'm going to tell you, you're not going to find much different. You're going to hear just those things. We need all these things to help kids be successful. We need to partner better with our businesses and our parents, right? We need longer time with teachers. We love our neighborhood school if they go to a neighborhood school. So I would say go out and do that listening and look at your strategic plan and see if there's much difference in what we found across Kansas. And I'm going to bet you're going to have 89% congruence. You may have some things that are unique to Wichita that you want to focus on in addition to. But as we think about school, if it's only about academic achievement and then we add all these other things on, teachers are going to die. Mm-hmm. They're already overworked. And so we have to think about, okay, if all these things are important, how would they, along with you and the community, redesign school? I come back. For a long time, it was a one-room schoolhouse. And now it's graded by age and time. What should it look like in the future to make sense for the community of Wichita? So you need to go out and find out and then layer that on top and see how much congruence there will be. As we learn from the Mercury and the Gemini schools, we'll be sharing those out of what that may look like, and you're welcome to go visit those schools.
Yeah, because I think what we want, even though it's early in the program, as we begin to develop our strategic plan to be able to move our district in the direction, we would like to be able to know what kinds of things you're learning so that that can be part of the conversation as the strategic plan is developed.
And we'll be happy to share that. And as we spin up maybe the Gemini Phase 2, we'd be excited to welcome Wichita as a partner if you wanted to do that too.
Yeah,
So
that would be wonderful.
Joy?
Good evening, Dr. Watson. Thank you for your work in the state and your vision. And one of the things I love about your plan is really making the focus about students knowing how to learn and how to solve problems, because you're right, the same jobs won't be there. That's been the case for a long time. The jobs I trained for in college were using Fortran, and there were no databases. And I think my first programming project was on a Cray, which was as big as this desk here, and couldn't handle as much as that smartphone in your hand. So all of those things are really true, and I think that is a good focus, and we've talked about that. That's part of rigor, is not just learning material, but understanding how material relates to one another and problem solving. One of my questions for you, though, is we talk a lot about plans for students, and one of the concerns I hear parents discuss or think about is around who makes the plan for your child. How does that come about? And what happens if your child starts down that plan and then decides they want to do something else? How do we make sure that, because, I have a 15-year-old now, right? He thinks he knows what he wants to do.
He doesn't know.
But
he thinks. No, he may.
Thinks he might know what he wants to do. He's trying some things out, but he doesn't know yet. And so, but he's already a freshman in high school. Mm-hmm. So by the time he kind of figures that out and gets on the right path, if we'd already made that plan in 6th grade, it would not look like the one we're on now. Okay. So maybe you can talk about that.
Joy, thank you for that question, because I think it's the misnomer of what we mean by individual plan of study. So let's go back a little bit when he was a 6th grader. And if you were to ask most 6th graders, what would you like to be when you grow up? Do you know the number one answer, Kansas kids?
Video game tester.
No, that's number 2.
Oh, okay.
Gamer's number 2, but that's good. That's pro athlete. Pro athlete. Gamer's number 2. And then when you get down to the first real occupation, it's veterinarian. And you ask them, oh, so you love science? No, I hate science, but I love dogs and animals. Well, you're not going to be a vet if you don't love science. Because when you ask a kid, what do you want to be, they give you an answer. We should be asking kids, what do you love to do? And who are you? So if I asked this with some kids I was with in Southeast Kansas, I said, how many of you would love an occupation where you worked outside, worked with your hands every day, and could earn a really good living without going to college? This was a student body of about 100 kids, and 20 hands went up. That's all I need to know. I don't know what you're going to do, because it could be a lot. I'm going to try to match that over and over. So at age 15, I don't really care what he wants to be. I want to care who is he and what does he like to do. If he loves numbers, It starts to give me a clue, right? I like to kind of work by myself. That gives me a clue. I like to be with people. Well, you may not want to be an accountant if you like to be around people. I mean, right? I mean, I love, we had kids that I want to be a nurse, and then they saw blood and they passed out. Well, those are good. So if you change your mind, that's a glorious thing because you haven't paid a dime for that experience in school. You should change your mind as often as you can because that means you've experienced something that says, that isn't what I want to do. So even when he leaves high school, if he doesn't know what he wants to do, but he's eliminated 5 things, we will have narrowed that down as he goes on, and that's what it ought to be about. So an individual plan should not be about choose what you want to do and we can't get you off that track. And it ought to be reviewed with the parent and the child about every 6 months because they change. And you should be looking at course patterns. Again, if someone wants to be a vet, just simply ask them, do you love science? And if the answer is no, they will never be a veterinarian. That's just reality. So if they love animals, they don't want to be a vet, what other things could they do? So is that helpful? I think the individual plan, I think we're all jumping to what is it that you want to do. I want us to help with the family. Who is your child? And is who I see him at school, is that who you see at home? What do you see that he likes? What kind of schoolwork does he like and does he not like? And those will start leaving us clues about who he is and what drives him. And we're going to try to match that passion with something that he can make a living at down the road.
Okay, my follow-up question to you is, I also heard you talk about requirements for graduation, 4 years of English. So those are things that are what you're required to do to go to college.
Mm-hmm.
Are you and the state board considering changing graduation requirements depending on what track a student might be on or what areas they're interested in?
That can happen today. What you need is 21 credits, and you need to follow the standards. So the standard may be in English. Read complex text and write about that. You could study Scarlet Letter and do that. You could read the GM technical manual and do that. You could read a lot of different things, complex text, and write about that. But today, what we do is we have the same curriculum basically, maybe the junior and senior year. What happens is that kids, I'll give you an example. Kids fail freshman English. It happens everywhere in our state. And you ask English teachers, why did they fail? Because they could not do the work? They're not capable of doing the work. No. They could, Randy. They won't do the work. I can't get them to do the work. I'm here before school, after school. I begged them. I've called their parents. Parents said, you're on your own. I don't know what to do with that kid. And when they fail, we put them in 2 English classes because we're behind in counting those credits toward graduation, and we've just removed them from one of the elective classes, which may be the very reason they're going to school, all because we're chasing a credit system. So even today, in the credit system, how you arrive at Algebra 1 is entirely up to the school board. It could be I could take a 52-minute Algebra 1 class. It could be I'm going to build a house, and the math teacher is going to figure out what math I need to build into that. That's kind of, as you think about the redesign, all of our teachers have to come and think about that. Because some kids love playing school. They love it. And they come to school, I like to sit here, I'm pretty good at it, I get grades, and other kids hate playing school. We have to craft that for every family and every kid. And how do we do that when the teachers have such a large caseload? It's hard in the existing system.
Okay, thank you so much for the clarification.
I have one question for you.
Yes, sir.
Out of all the Mercury schools that you have and the Gemini schools, is there a school that would relate in demographics to us that we could watch and say, you know, they're doing this and that makes sense and might make sense for us?
Size-wise, no. The closest size would be Olathe,
Right.
but they don't. Most of Olathe doesn't look like you. Coffeyville and Liberal do. Demographically, Coffeyville and Liberal look very much like you. They're not the same size,
Right.
but they look like you demographically, and they're going through this process.
Okay.
When we hired Jay and Tammy and said we're going to choose 7 Mercury schools, and then we said, oh, by the way, Coffeyville Liberal, those are close. Just feel free to drive between those every day. They were like, oh, wow. So those were 2. You know, you're honestly, you know, looking at Stockton or Wellington is not going to give you as many clues as Liberal and Coffeyville, as they have challenges just like you do.
Well, Randy, I'd like to thank you for your time and your presentation, and
Mike,
we'll
thank
hope
you.
to see you again sometime in the spring with some other news.
Invite me back. I come for water, so, okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.